Hello, my name is Ali Levine. I am joined by two professors at UTSA. If you guys would like to introduce yourselves.
Absolutely. I'm Mary McNaughton-Cassill. I am a clinical psychologist in the psychology department. I've been at UTSA since 1994.
My name is Terrence Hill, and I am a professor in the Department of Sociology and Demography. And my area of expertise is medical sociology and the social psychology of health and illness. And I've been at UTSA since 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Dr. McNaughton-Cassill, what's your kind of area of expertise in this discussion? We'll be discussing social capital today.
Yes, I study stress and coping, and of course, social interaction, social resources are a huge component of people's abilities to deal with everything from personal stress to inequities.
Okay, and then for the sake of today's discussion, I'll be using Oxford Dictionary's definition of social capital, which is the network of relations among people who live and work in a particular society, enabling them to, or that society to function efficiently. So, along with that comes resources, social connections with people, and all other aspects of kind of social communication. And we'll be discussing how that social capital interacts with how it impacts stress and then also overall life outcomes. So, how would y'all say sociologists and psychologists think about the role of social capital in promoting health and well-being? Dr. Hill, you can go first if you'd like.
Um, that's a great question. As sociologists, we are fundamentally concerned with social relationships and social dynamics. In the area of medical sociology, social epidemiology, social psychology of health and illness, um, we regularly look at factors related to social capital. I don't see the word social capital used as much as something like social support, social relationships, social ties, social integration. These are more terms that we see: social engagement, engaging in social activities. These are the terms that we use more often, but they're all very much related to that concept. And most of the research that I've been involved with and have read has focused on a direct effect of social relationships, social support, social resources on health and well-being, and even life expectancy, how long people live. Um, and then there's the second major literature is the stress buffering literature that shows how supportive ties and related concepts buffer the effects of adversities in our life, like natural disasters, the financial troubles, and things of that nature. And a lot of my work has focused on these types of concepts and related. So a lot of my research has focused on social support. A lot of it has focused on marriage, marital relationships, and how that's related to social support. In terms of the kind of the costs of social relationships, because I view social relationships as a double-edged sword, and the other side of that are concepts like intimate partner violence, social demands, not receiving support, but providing support to others, social demands. And then also a lot of my research in religion focuses on strained relationships within religious communities that are ideologically based, or they feel that their community asks too much of them, things like that. These are things that are called divine religious struggles now. And those are the way we kind of think about it, and that's kind of what I'm interested in.
Okay, and Dr. McNaughton?
I think we're very similar. Of course, we always look at the individual as they're embedded in the social network. I use a scale by Catrona and Russell, which has 6 components of social support, which sounds like it overlaps a lot with what you're saying. And so we're always looking at what does the person need and does their support match it? So for example, a college student definitely needs a mentor, and that falls into the guidance category. If you break your leg, you need instrumental help. You need someone who will come over and drive you to school, those sorts of things. So we look at the different components. We might want to come back to that idea of the social demands, because we find that the opportunity to nurture others has benefits and downsides. And that's an interesting piece to look at. I did some nursing home work for a while, and elderly folks in nursing homes struggle, especially with feeling useless, like everyone's taking care of them and they're not doing anything constructive to contribute. We also look at social support, and you mentioned this already, from two different sides. Loneliness is a problem in terms of mental health, highly correlated with depression and anxiety. So bolstering people's social support can help, but only if it's good social support, if it's quality. If you're trying to quit drinking and all of your social support comes from your friends at the bar, that's going to be a negative side of it. So there are so many components of this. And my original early background was in biological psychology. So I always come back to the brain aspects of this, and we just seem to be wired. We are wired to watch others, to judge nonverbal cues, to pay attention to tone, to talk, and to want contact. And one of the very first things infants look at is faces. So it's from the very beginning. I don't personally work in it, but a lot of psychologists have spent a lot of time on the really early attachments, how your social connections play out in those first year or two of life, defining sort of your approach over the long run.
Yeah, you mentioned mentoring, and that's actually interesting. The research that I'm doing right now, my graduate research assistant position, we're actually researching adverse childhood events, ACEs.
Yes.
And one of the things that we're kind of trying to focus on is resilience and how that kind of impacts it. And one of the like mechanisms that we kind of have seemed to found in the literature was mentoring as a big component for helping to increase resilience, especially in like buffering those negative outcomes. That and also team sports was actually very interesting kind of group form of social capital. I imagine that comes with the mentoring relationship of a kind of coach, but also the kind of like group team aspect of working with everyone.
We have a concept related to the mentoring concept. It's called the sense of mattering. And they just ask people like in surveys to what extent they feel they matter to other people, that other people need them, that other people feel their contributions in their life. And so yeah, that's a good point about social demands can be a stressor, but on the other hand, it can also be a source of your identity and the degree to which you value yourself, because that's a major contributor to self-esteem. How do you know you're a person of worth? Because all these people need me in their life.
Yeah, I really like that term, sense of mattering. We talk a lot about belonging. And in my research on college students' success, probably the best predictor of not dropping out, of retaining in college, is to feel like you fit in on your campus. If you
Well,
feel like you are not, part of it, or you're an outsider in some way, that's often associated with just stopping.
Does that kind of come with those some of those negative aspects, such as like binge drinking culture and things like that, kind of participating in those kind of social aspects?
I see those as downstream. Those are attempts to cope with not feeling that you fit in. So, for example, if you are, a minority student at a majority white school, or you come from a first gen family and you believe that everyone around you knows a lot more about how to succeed, or you don't get good mentoring, and so you feel like the system is just overwhelming and you don't understand it. So those kind of things are the belonging. But then what happens is exactly what you said. Students start coping poorly. They skip class, they drink, they don't sleep, they stay up all night and study, and that makes their health worse. I mean, it becomes a cycle.
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm.
I actually wanted to ask you about coping mechanisms. Does have you noticed that like increased social capital kind of helps in promoting healthier coping mechanisms, or is it a little bit of both?
Do you want to go first, or you want me to?
Yeah, because I think you'll have more to say on this. Um, yes, the reason why we care so much about the health consequences of social support is because it's related to a lot of coping processes, and And one of the big ones that we emphasize is the strong relationship between social capital and self-esteem. Just feeling that you're a person of worth, that you're not a failure, that you are worthy of love. You learn that through a life of quality social relationships where you get that kind of social input. Um, uh, we also emphasize the ways that social support interacts with the human physiology in terms of buffering allostatic load, which is chronic stress exposure. We're seeing recent studies connecting social support with cellular aging, with slower cellular aging or longer telomere length. Um, we can also see some connections between social support and healthy lifestyles, um, and but definitely better mental health in terms of lower levels of depression and anxiety. These are important mental health outcomes, but they're also really important for coping styles and coping strategies. And yeah, so that's what I was thinking about.
I agree. And even health behaviors. If the people around you exercise or eat healthy, that'll influence you. And even, the Facebook studies, people in your network influence your attitudes on things around health. I suspect that's part of the link between education and living longer, is that the more educated you are, the more likely you are to be aware of some of those things. Whereas if you haven't gone to college, you're probably working a job that is in worse conditions, harder physically, and you just don't have time or
Mhm.
resources to track a lot of the things that would help you to live longer. I also like the idea of coping as something you can learn. And I've been talking a lot with students about the fact that, we don't teach it. We're just assuming people will find how to do it along their own and learn from their parents and whatever. And it isn't helping. In my stress management and coping class, I spend a whole semester talking about it. And what the most common comment at the end is, I wish they taught this sooner. I wish I had had someone, quote unquote, mentor me or tell me how to manage some of this stuff. So I do think that's a place where psychology, sociology, all of us could look at interventions more.
And I agree. That should be a first semester 1 hour course. When I
Yeah.
was at University of Arizona, we had a course on self-compassion,
Yes.
and students that's a gift that they have for the rest of their lives. Thinking about these things because the only coping styles they're getting from their families are problematic, probably
Arguing, poor communication, using
hiding,
substance,
ignoring, avoiding,
avoidance.
avoiding.
Yep, exactly.
Mm.
Um, I would even start it even younger than that. I agree totally in college, but I don't know why. I was just a kid because my kids went through public schools in Texas, and I think we tracked the stages of the moon at least 5 times. No one ever brought home a worksheet that said, here's your brain, here's the
Mm,
amygdala, here's how it
mm,
works. And
mm.
it just makes me crazy because if we
Wow.
understand it better,
Mhm.
we can understand what we need to do to keep it healthy.
I love that contrast that we know more about the moon than we know about our own lived experience,
Exactly.
and we just make the same mistakes over and over again, sleepwalking. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. And
yeah.
even when you're trained in the field, you still can, your first, response, it can be the wrong one, but at least you have another strategy in the back. But I see so many kids who really just don't know if this doesn't work, I don't know what to do. And then that's when they quit school, quit the job, leave the marriage. They don't have other strategies to manage the situation.
Can I emphasize something that Mary said earlier when she was talking about education and life expectancy? This is another way that I forgot to mention that social support matters for health. It's not just social support, not just starting with social support, but social support is a link between a lot of other social processes in health. And that's I totally agree with that. That one of the main reasons why socioeconomic status matters for health is that especially the concept educational attainment that allows you to learn different perspectives and to relate to other people and have better relationships. That's what social support is a main mechanism of that. In my research on religion, religious involvement, that's one of the main mechanisms for why going to church regularly promotes health and life expectancy, is because it integrates people and gives people a larger social community. This is also a major reason why intimate partner violence is devastating, because it isolates, it does the opposite, that it isolates people from supportive relationships. And so, yeah, so that's another really interesting way we start to see volumes of research on how social support integrates with other health processes.
I haven't done research on this specifically, but in my private practice, I've worked with people who've been involuntarily laid off for various reasons. And they all, of course, cite the money, but the hardest part is the friendships, the connections, and the sense of belonging and, sense of self, like I am no longer an employed person. And they really struggle with that for the very reasons I think you're bringing up.
Mhm. I recently I published a paper a year or two ago on pandemic job separation, because
Mhm.
a lot of people lost their job suddenly, and there was that we found a strong relationship between having lost your job suddenly and your sense and the amount of social support that you had.
Yes.
And in addition to what you were saying, there's a lot of shame that a lot of
Oh,
people they
absolutely.
had so much shame, and they didn't know, they didn't want to talk to other people. They wanted to kind of isolate because they were, probably depressed. And then you also had on the other side, you had people that were wanting to avoid them so they wouldn't ask them for money or help. And so
Right.
people started abandoning the people that lost
Yep.
their jobs as well. And so and that was really important, because we never really talked about that in the media. It was only about contagion
Yep.
and the virus and the physical body, but it wasn't really talking about the social dynamics and how isolating the pandemic was. And then on top of that, losing your job was isolating. Yeah.
I had a client, a male, who said, I never realized how often people say, "What's your name?" And then, "What do you do for a living?" That's the next
Mm-hmm.
opening question. And he was really distraught about what to say now that he couldn't say, I don't forget, engineer or whatever he was, and that to him, like that ties back to self-esteem and where you
Mm-hmm.
fit in. And, I think the pandemic's an interesting case because there was so much research on the initial loneliness and the isolation. But I think there's like a long-term social COVID, not like the illness,
Mm-hmm.
but it's impacted people in a long-term in some ways that aren't as obvious.
Like what? Like, or what are some of the things you're seeing?
A lot of my students are saying that they either spent the last couple of years of high school or the first couple of years of college during COVID. So they didn't do some of the normal social things, even like dating, and they feel like they're behind in that. They also didn't get the chance to get mentors and networking and interact with people in person. And so that, they're juniors and seniors now, and they say, well, I feel like I'm just behind in those
Mm-hmm.
connections that I would have had, a year and a half, 2 more years to make if I hadn't been shut down.
Mm. That's fun. Yeah,
I
that's fascinating.
I actually I've worked with like young kids. I was a preschool teacher for a little bit, and I also noticed even like early on from them, a lot of them had difficulty with like forming relationships, with communicating, with different kind of aspects of that, especially trust.
Mhm.
They were definitely a lot more anxious than I feel like they would have been prior to COVID, prior to that kind of isolation, especially because a lot of them didn't really get to have those interactive experiences with people as much.
And it probably again came back to income of your family because people who had income and time to stay home and make sure they stayed up with school had a different advantage than folks who were working multiple jobs and didn't have the opportunity. And so it created a, sort of another social inequity.
Mm-hmm.
And
That
I was just thinking about it when you were talking about teams. So no one had a team during that time. Everything stopped, and that was a problem too.
that kind of brings me to one of my next questions. How can policies or community programs kind of foster social capital, improve to improve public health and reduce stress? Y'all kind of addressed this a little bit, but are there any other like specific ways that you think that could happen?
So I'm not trained in policy analysis or anything like that. I'm a sociologist, so just keep that in mind. A lot of what I say is about kind of fundamental recommendations that are probably obvious. We just don't have the political will to do anything about it. Um, I want to preface this by saying, has anybody, I don't know if anybody's seen that new social capital documentary, Join or Die.
You
Have you
told
seen
me
this?
about
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Well, I don't really think that documentary is very good because the whole premise of this is that it's a decision for you to join and to be connected to others. It's an individual, personal decision, and I have a problem with that because I feel like that's an oversimplification. I think there are a lot of structural barriers. As sociologists, I focus on the structural barriers that prevent people from connecting, and those seems to be the best places to think about intervening if you do those types of interventions. But one of the most macro things is rising income inequality. The fact that wealth is being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. We're seeing a shrinking of the middle class. We're seeing these larger gaps in the distribution of income in our society. This creates status competition and mistrust in the general population. This has nothing to do with your choice. This has nothing to do with your personal choice to join. Then you start to think about, just over the past 40 years, the rise of neoliberalism and the decline of benefits in our jobs and declining wages and so forth. So then you start to see something that Mary said earlier. You have to work two jobs. You have to have a side gig. This is this is taking a lot of time that you might have used for affiliation and connection to other people. Um, I think the decline in marriage has had a negative impact, I think. Also, secularization of society. More and more people are leaving religious groups, especially the most conservative, fundamentalist type of religious groups. They're leaving a lot of family relationships behind, a lot of friendships, a lot of their identity. There's just a lot of change along those lines. And then, as mentioned earlier, the pandemic just kind of added on to that, disconnecting people. And it wasn't, and what I think what I'm getting from this discussion is that it wasn't just, it didn't stop when the pandemic was over, that a lot of people were left with some deficits that's going to impact them adversely moving forward unless, they get some help. But so reducing income inequality, increasing people's socioeconomic status generally, having a living wage for people so they don't have to work multiple jobs. Um, you know, for older adults, I think it's important to have programs that keep older adults connected to their communities, because social isolation becomes a big problem, especially when there's health problems due to aging. And so those are the things I was thinking about.
I definitely agree. And again, I'm not a policy person either, but even things like more places to socialize, parks where you can walk your dog. In my dad's old hometown, they had the hall where the Shriners and everybody met, but there aren't a lot of places like that anymore where you can gather. And transportation makes it an issue, making it easier for people to get to things. I agree with you about the decline, not just in, church attendance, but bowling, anything where you were dealing with people one-on-one. We've had some good success in the psych department. Another professor, Dr. Lopez, and I have been hosting these in-person panels on things like careers in psych. And the most recent one was a pastry with professors, and we
Nice,
had
nice.
over 100 kids came. We were
Wow.
surprised, but it was our new faculty that just joined and talking. And at one point, there was a longer line to talk to the new faculty than to get the food, which I thought was a
Wow.
good sign.
That's a
But
great sign. That's a great
we
sign.
we got to build on those things, and it is easier to sit at home and stay disconnected, but we have to get people comfortable going out again, and we haven't even touched on the whole social media thing. And again, I've only done a little research on
Good
it, but
point.
my take on it is it can keep you connected as long as you still have in-person
Mhm.
connections as well.
That's a great point. Something I've been working on recently is comparing in-person religious attendance with virtual religious
Mhm.
attendance. And what we're seeing is that in-person religious attendance integrates people associated with social support and better mental health, but virtual religious attendance was not.
Yeah.
And in some cases, in reducing the amount of social support, like the more you're going to religious services online, the less social support that you have,
Yeah.
and basically no health benefits to that. So this just like
Interesting.
this reinforces what we're learning, that a lot of these social relationships, integration processes, social relationship, that this really does have to be an in-person ritual that really helps, more so than these virtual relationships, which are not substitutes.
Which really says to me that churches should put more money into having volunteer drivers to get
Yes,
to church than having the service online.
I call that a spiritual lift program.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
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 No, that it's so it's an obvious that's an obvious intervention.
Yeah.
To keep older adults who are religious, some are not, but the ones that are religious
Yeah.
connected with their communities, or it could be a ride program to connect them with a social club. Like you said, there are other
Yeah.
ways to kind of integrate. And but yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. It's very hard to make the changes because people are busy and families, are spread out because of jobs and other things, and folks are living longer, but none of that has taken away the need to feel connected somehow.
Even if
Yeah,
even if we've forgotten about that over during the pandemic, I feel like people need to be reminded, because I think that's a big part of what you were seeing with your students, that they
Yeah.
they were being reminded what it's the benefits of being in person and feeling connection with other people. Like
Right.
people need to be reminded of that, because it is comfortable in kind of a stress aversion way to stay alone and to have your
Yeah.
isolation fantasies and wanting to live in nature by yourself and things like that. But
No, it
that's
doesn't
not yeah,
doesn't work out well
yeah,
that
yeah,
way.
no.
I think from a student perspective, even just doing online classes, one of the two big things that I heard from students was it's easier for my grades, but then also, they weren't getting those connections. That was the whole big thing that made people want the online or like in-person classes back. Was I don't get to talk to anybody anymore. No, a lot of professors weren't requiring people to keep their cameras on, and so you weren't even really seeing people's faces. Even that aspect, I feel like, was a big part of feeling kind of isolated. Um,
From my end, I hate teaching online, because I like to feel the emotional energy of being in a group, of being face to face with students. And I don't want to be selfish or whatever, but like I don't get any personal value from teaching online.
no,
No, it's different.
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
I did
definitely
have a
felt.
student who did her thesis on social anxiety and having classes online.
Mhm.
But of course, if you're socially anxious, you think you want that. But what do we say in psych? When you're anxious and you avoid the thing you're anxious about, it gets worse and worse. You
They
have to
reinforce.
face and do the thing you're
Mhm.
anxious about and find out it wasn't that bad. So it may have actually made the problem worse, even though it temporarily seemed like, oh, great, I don't have to go.
Mhm.
No, yeah, I definitely feel like it brought a sense of I guess kind of like awkwardness to the discussions in class because when you're in person the professor can kind of call on you. They can say, do you want to answer this and stuff, and when you're in a Zoom call when no one has their camera on, just does anyone want to say anything? No,
Mhm.
okay, like
Yeah, it's
Yes, something
odd.
is lost. Something is lost when you mediate the connection through technology. There's something that's lost.
The one thing I liked about teaching online synchronous, so you're all there, but is sometimes the chat would really take off. And I would be lecturing and there would be a question in the chat. And it was great to see other students answer it well. And, I liked that piece of it because I think some people who wouldn't make a comment out loud would put it in the chat. But
Mm.
I still like the in-person better.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't think we should get rid of online education, but I was just thinking about my personal
mhm.
experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and this is kind of going back a little bit, but I wanted to make this note, Dr. Hill, you were talking about people leaving those more orthodox religions and how those have very strong social ties. I actually kind of wanted to plug in a little example of that. There's a
Mhm.
really good it's kind of like pseudo documentary almost on Netflix. It's called
Mhm.
Unorthodox.
Mhm.
You see a lot of stuff with like more Orthodox evangelical Christian stuff, not really a lot of other religious stuff. And this show actually kind of goes into Hasidic Jews,
Mhm.
and the whole concept is this woman that was just married, who's a Hasidic Jew, and she leaves her community, and it shows all of the kind of negative aspects of that. It was very much a kind of personal decision for safety and comfortability, but then it shows how that social network, even if it was bad, had all of those safety nets for her, kind of, and it had that kind of group mechanism.
This goes right back to the primary attachments that Mary was talking about, I think, and this is why I view this as, and to some extent, to the extent that our society is secularizing, I see this as a public health concern. They have a new term. They're called leavers. They're called leavers. You can see books on this. They're called people leaving their religious groups. I think any religious group that you were raised in is a big part of your relationships with your parents and friends, and the way you think about yourself, the way you think about the world. All of that becomes jeopardized when you leave that behind. You have strained relationships with your parents, with your friends. You have all this ideological confusion. You start to get into these other religious and spiritual struggles, like religious doubts, and what do you really believe? What is this world about? And is there order in the world and things like that? This is Yeah, this is like a major development. I feel like that doesn't get a lot of attention as an epidemic. I think because it's political. I think a lot of people are torn politically because a lot of people view religion as a conservative institution, and so they think that secularization is good, but they don't acknowledge that there are these side effects to the secularization of our society.
And what you said about order and meaning, I mean, religion has traditionally provided everything from the traditions to the connection. And we don't like change, and we don't like an unpredictable future. And it's really scary. And when big things happen, I've done some work at disasters, and
Mm.
it's not just that you lose your house, but you lose all that connection to the tradition and the memories and the pieces. And I often say to people, that's why folks will stay in an uncomfortable job, bad marriage, even a religion that's not good, is because it's
Mhm.
kind of soothing to stay with the familiar. I mean, we're so
Mhm.
scared of the unfamiliar that people will say, well, it could be worse. I better just stick here.
Mhm.
Um, I kind of wanted to discuss kind of the way that social capital affects different populations, different groups. So I was looking
Mhm.
at an article by Martin Gachter, I think that is,
Mhm.
et al.
Mhm.
They were kind of investigating police, and this wasn't necessarily like police unions, but like social capital with police. So it's not necessarily generalizable to the full population, but they kind of explained that different populations, the way that stress affects them in different aspects is different. So, like for women, they suffer more from the physical and health aspects rather than the psychological effects. And they kind of attribute that to women being more likely to discuss their issues with each other, that kind of conversational bonding aspect, I guess, of social capital. Are there any other like specific groups or aspects that you can think of maybe?
Yeah, that's a big question in the literature that I read, is how not everybody benefits from social support and social connection in the same way. And there are a lot of structural processes that impact this. The most consistent pattern that I've seen is that men tend to benefit more from social support than women. And you see that with respect to mental health and life expectancy. Even though women have more supportive relationships, those relationships mean more to men. And one of the interesting theories about that is that for men, the social supportive the relationships they have are kind of unidirectional in the sense that they're just taking
Mm-hmm.
and receiving the benefits of support. But when women have relationships, they're more bidirectional, where they're receiving but also giving a lot, and that the stress of the giving of the social demands can weaken the benefits that you might receive. There's also some other evidence maybe suggesting that younger people may benefit more from social support. or as we age, the benefits of social support maybe decline, even though they, I think that probably depends on certain populations. White adults tend to benefit more from social support. Um, and a lot of that centers around, people of color having a lot of structural adversity, which just overwhelms the supportive relationships. You start to think about network ties and homophily that disadvantaged people cluster together, affiliate with each other. And it's like, what kind of support can you get when you're in a network of poor people, for example, or structurally disadvantaged people? It's easier to benefit from social relationships because white people tend to have a lot of advantages, um, and people with higher socioeconomic status tend to benefit more from social support too, because I think they have fewer challenges and adversities, and more advantaged social networks, richer sources of support. They can engage in social support more often because they have more flexible time, things like that. Um, and the last thing is the importance of relationship quality. Some of these issues like intimate partner violence, divorce, marriage, the benefits of those or the detriments of those depend on the nature of the relationship itself. Like, marriage tend to benefits health if the relationship quality is good. Divorce is less detrimental to people who are leaving a low quality relationship, because then it's freedom. It's like an
Right.
escape. And so lots of interesting dynamics like that.
It's really fascinating. And I've also seen some research that showed that sometimes people living closer to poverty have stronger like family and interties. If you're in a community where you've been for a long time and you know people and you're relying on each other. So I think you're exactly right. It's the resources, it's also the culture, the traditions. I've done a lot of work with veterans, and one of the real problems they have when they leave the military is it's a built-in social support and it's very powerful. And when they leave, they don't know how to replicate or rebuild that. And I think that is a place there could be more help provided. I think it's probably part of the reason for the mental health issues that we're seeing in people who separate. Um, but on the other hand, you mentioned cops, and we're talking about veterans. They don't encourage each other to talk about feelings necessarily. There's sort of that, John Wayne culture, and that can hurt too. I really agreed with you about men and women. I did a study quite a while ago where we were doing support groups for couples going through infertility treatment. And this was down at Lackland, so they were military couples. And the women did not benefit, but the men did. And when we did, it was both survey and support groups. And when we talked to them, the women said, "Oh, I'm talking to my sister, my cousin, someone else." The guys, some of them had talked to no one about fertility and found it really comforting to have another military guy who also was having that problem. So it
Mhm.
might just even have to do with, the dynamics of male communication. And I don't know if this is quite the right word, but the tendency to stay more transactional and less emotional when you're talking to other people.
Mhm. I think this is important too, because I feel like I don't know if this is a social media impression I'm getting, like that
Mhm.
there is no tolerance for loneliness in men. Suck it up. Like, I mean, there's a lot of that. There is a lot coming from the men
Yeah,
themselves, because masculinity is about being stoic and being independent and all that. But then
yeah,
we have this society that has no tolerance to talk about men and their suffering, right? Because they have all the advantages. Um, and yeah, one other point I wanted to make about some of my mentors from graduate school, they like to pit social support against other resources, and they found something that they called resource substitution. That
mhm,
they contrasted social support in the sense of control, locus of control, control beliefs, believing that you can control good and bad things that happen in your life. Basically, they found that the more of that you have of one, the less you need of the other, or the less important the other one is. So if you have a low
mhm.
sense of control, social support is really important. If you have high social support, believing that you have a sense of control, that you can control things that happen in your life, is less important. So
Very
that's
interesting.
that there's an interesting balancing act that they argued was this concept of resource substitution.
It's very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, and the male thing is really interesting at the college student level because in many majors there's more women. Women are graduating more. There's a lot of more academic success from females, and people are talking about it. And I've been saying for a while, I don't know if I should call them this, but I think of this group of lost boys, boys who
Mhm.
don't know how to express their feelings, don't have good guidance or mentorship. It's not IQ, but they won't reach out and ask for help. And so they fall in the cracks a lot. And I think that's another place we as universities and other groups could do more. And,
Yeah,
when you
yeah.
circle back, many times the one person they did talk to was a coach or someone where it was socially acceptable.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I identify with that as a man, just a lot of shame, dealing with a lot
Mhm.
of shame in my life, not feeling that you could ask for help.
Yes,
And but once you do that, it's just it's once you're a man, you can ask for help, you can change your life forever. A concept that I'm working with a colleague at NC State. She's developing this concept called strategic masculine disinvestment. And
hmm
it's this idea that more recent cohorts of men, especially Gen Z men, are consciously trying to act less manly. And we asked them questions about why they do that. Those that admitted to it, about it was
hmm
about 21% of men in the US
hmm
admit to intentionally acting less masculine. We asked them, why do you do that?
hmm
And the number one reason, this reinforces what we were saying about the importance of social, is to enhance their social relationships. That they believe that acting less masculine is going to improve their relationships with romantic partners and friends. And that just shows you like what
Yeah.
men are can be, especially young men, recent cohorts of men are willing to do. Uh, and
Yeah,
the downside though is that men who do that have higher levels of depression and anxiety and lower sense of
absolutely.
control and all these. So there's like they're choosing the social benefits over the psychological costs of losing their identity because they've already been socialized to be masculine.
Right.
These men have already been socialized, and now they're trying to get rid of this. And it seems like this seems to be the recommendation is that we have to get men to distance themselves from masculinity to be healthier. What do you do when you do that and it makes them less healthy?
And often what they will say to me is they know what they don't want. Their dad was stoic or abusive or whatever. They want to have different relationships. They want to be different with their own kids. But then they say, but I don't know how to do that. I don't have any role model. I haven't seen the good relationships. And you can't impose mentoring on people, but I
Mhm.
do really think we need more males mentoring males, especially in the high school, college age.
I agree. I went to a support group that was all men once.
Right,
I It took me like several meetings to stop crying because I had never seen like to be able to talk because
right.
I'd never seen a 50 men in a room talking about how they are vulnerable, talking about how
Absolutely.
that they feel powerless and things like that. It reminded me of how unique that was. You never see that anywhere else. You never see this type of vulnerability in a group of
Yeah.
men.
So what we need to change is the perception that it's not masculine to be vulnerable. You shouldn't have to avoid the masculine side of your personality to be able to say, I'm scared or I'm upset.
I
And
like that balance. I like that balance because I feel like we're just shaming masculinity right
yes.
now, and we're as opposed to saying it's okay for you to be relational and
Yeah.
connected.
You can
And I
kind of
think you're right about the value of connections for men and women because women often have multiple sisters, cousins, best friends they talk to. And for men, often it's their partner, whoever their relationship is with. And if something goes awry with that, they don't even have someone to talk about about what's
Mhm.
going wrong.
And that puts a lot of pressure on the relationship.
Yeah.
If the man doesn't have like a talk therapist or somebody else to go to,
Oh
you
yeah.
can't put all that on your partner. You cannot do
You
that.
cannot. And
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you do, then they get resentful and the whole thing unglues. Or it's even worse if you both have the same crisis, so they don't have the energy to deal with it either.
Hmm. Yep.
I feel like you also especially see this in certain populations that emphasize more of that stoic masculinity, especially with the whole machismo with
Yeah.
Hispanic communities and stuff. I feel like that would definitely impact them a lot more than other
Mhm.
communities that don't talk about your feelings aspect. I definitely like the idea of rather than just rejecting masculinity as a whole, kind of more so integrating general, I guess, like feelings discussion as a normalized thing in society. I wonder how that kind of interacts in other countries where it's more less gender dynamics of like emotional aspects kind of.
I don't really know. And I
Mhm.
think part of the problem is that they're always underlying things, you know, and you can look at other cultures and say people are more or less depressed, but you first have to get into all the other factors going on. You know, I get really frustrated when people will say, hold up a Scandinavian country and say, well, look how happy they are. And I'm like, that's socioeconomic. They have enough
Mhm.
money to provide the basics to everybody.
They have a great welfare state. Yep.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Yep.
and it's
Yep.
because they're small and somewhat homogeneous, and we don't have the resources to replicate that. So it's an apples to oranges comparison right now.
Do you, one of the kind of forms of social capital that kind of informed this whole discussion was looking at union membership. And
Mhm.
actually, the United States has some of the lowest union membership, but we actually have extremely high support for union membership. I think it was around like 60% of Americans support it, but only 10% are members. And a lot of those Scandinavian countries, like you mentioned, have really high union membership. Iceland's one of the has the highest membership. It's over like 90%. Do you think that um that kind of like union is a very strong form of social capital? Obviously it provides a lot of resources, there's not a lot of research on it, but the research that I've kind of looked into has shown that the it kind of helps with worker retention rates, it helps with worker stress because the stress of maintaining your income isn't really as much on the individual, it's on the group. Is that like a kind of form of capital you think should be promoted or maybe like
Yes,
in
yes,
that
yes.
aspect?
Yes, no, yes. You know, this is a big one of the main reasons why income inequality has been skyrocketing is it dovetails perfectly with the decline of union membership. That is fundamentally a class relationship where you connect with other people of similar class. So I mean, so you can have affiliation and connection through a union fundamentally, but also that's worker power. That the decline
Yeah.
that we have observed when I don't
And
know if
control.
yeah, back in the day, I don't know if like in the 30s or whatever, maybe the union membership was like 40% or something like that. And now it's like down to 10%. That decline, it is not a surprise that wages have stagnated during that same period. That all the wealth is going to the top 1%. Because workers have no representation anymore through unions. And that's I didn't know that. I'm actually surprised by the support numbers that you're about how
Mhm.
many people actually support unions because like a big part of that decline of union is like this the stigmatization of unions, you know, as being communists or grifters or something like that. They're trying to steal your money. But so I think directly having a union could have been something you do regularly, a group that you would visit with regularly,
Mhm.
the same people. It would be a ritual that you could do, but also just downstream in terms of the economic downturns. Everything I was talking about earlier about the concentration of wealth would not have happened to the same degree with unions present because they would have had more worker power to get more of what they deserve. And but with that increasing income inequality is more status competition, more and the decline of unions represents a disintegration of our society along class lines. And yeah, so all those downstream economic consequences I think come from the decline of union membership.
Remind me, Allie, I have a student who was a psych major, but now she's getting her master's in poli sci. And she married someone who lived in Sweden, so she lived there for years, and she's going to do her thesis on unions. So you might want to talk to her if you're interested in just connecting. Remind me to send you her email connection.
Yeah, I will. Yeah. I really like the idea of like increasing union membership. I think a big part of like that disconnect in like membership versus support, I think a big part of it is the whole that negative connotation in society, especially in
Mhm.
American societies. And then also there's been a lot of corruption still in unions, and I think that's an
Mhm.
issue of still just leadership
But
issues.
we should be careful though, because like the main reasons, those may be a reason here or there, but the main reasons why unions have declined is that our government and our corporations don't allow it. They
I think
and even though
union
even
busting.
yeah, even though we've had a recent resurgence during the pandemic of people trying to form unions, you just hear nothing but strike breaking efforts. And don't forget, both of the last two presidents have contributed to breaking strikes. The most recent one was the railroad strike. The Biden administration broke that strike when they were asking for basic things like bathroom breaks and could they have 1 day off a month or something, or 1 day off a whatever. They were just asking for like 1 day off and some bathroom breaks or something like that, and they couldn't get it. And
Yeah.
yeah, and that's not about the stigma of it. It's not about um, it's really about the people in power knowing that it is not in their interest for their workers to unionize.
I think I think
And the
that's a
people
big.
in the unions, they provide a sense of control too. Like you said earlier, you feel like I can't fight them, but maybe a group of us can fight or something.
I think a big part of that is that's a big policy thing like we discussed that should be addressed definitely,
Yeah,
because
that's a good point.
it is like law that you can't union bust, that you can't prevent workers from trying to unionize, but I think it's definitely something that needs to be enforced more with not allowing companies to kind of do that, and kind of more from a policy standpoint allowing that leeway for unions to form.
The problem is the companies have the lobbyists that get to the
Yes,
politicians.
yes,
They're not
yes.
going to do that when the money for their campaign is not on the union side.
And we haven't even talked about the Supreme Court. The one thing that we always talk about, the social and cultural issues that they're divided on, the one thing they agree on is breaking strikes and
Mhm.
supporting corporations. And that's something that is always we always like overlook because we focus on the divisions in the Supreme Court. The scary things are what they agree on, and it's almost uniform in favor of corporations. You think that Citizens United decision making,
Mhm.
like anyway, like
Yeah.
the impacts of that, that's bipartisan on on those courts. uh yeah, but that's a great point. I like that as an intervention. I wasn't thinking about that. That's a fundamental intervention to support the growth of union memberships. What about a grant program that would, like a grant for starting a union or something like that? Like that would be
Oh,
amazing.
that'd be interesting.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
There's so
But
many
yeah,
ideas.
yeah, yeah.
I think honestly the whole union busting and that being such a common thing kind of almost exemplifies how much power social capital has, especially in the workforce, how afraid I guess corporations can be of workers uniting with each other and having that leverage over them.
Yeah.
I feel like yeah, that's
And we
definitely.
never really talk about that. We don't really talk how social capital relates to your socioeconomic resources.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think we talk
Yeah.
too much enough about that. But you're right, it is fundamental in that sense.
Mhm.
Very
Um,
interesting.
Yeah.
And then kind of to close out, what are kind of some suggestions for the next generation of social capital scholars that what should they prioritize, I guess, in their research focusing on?
I would say focusing more on loneliness, especially in men. I like what you were saying about studying the role of unionization more. Um, and I think also just emphasizing more of the dark side of our relationships. I'm really interested in the religious struggles dynamic. Um, uh, Trying to think what else would I say? Mattering, those positive these other spin-off concepts that mentoring, mattering, belonging, that I feel like are still kind of understudied.
And I always come back to the interpersonal side of that, better communication skills, better listening skills. Like I said, teaching more about the brain and coping and stress at younger ages. providing more mentoring and support, even at the campus level, having more in-person activities that will draw students into interacting again. And I don't know if I really believe that they're much worse at interacting than before. It's just that before online, you had to go to class or you couldn't get the information. But, you know, people still cut class and other things. We have to make these events be something that gets them engaged and gets, you know, reaches them where they are. And I think that it's hard in a large culture where a lot of people have a lot of really different approaches.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, thank y'all very much. I would just like to note I did produce some of these questions. Dr. Hill very thoughtfully kind of helped to revise them, so I'd like to give him credit. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah.
And I would like to thank
That's
both of
mentoring.
y'all.
That's mentoring in real time.
That's
Mm-hmm.
mentoring.
There's mentoring. I
And
definitely
I
noticed.
enjoy talking about these things, so it was
Yeah.
fun.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was
I
good to meet
definitely
you.
noticed a lot of mentorship in the kind of social science departments, a lot of discussions based. So I very much appreciate that from the professor's side and the administrative side.
And
Um,
also we need to do more of this, doing the interdisciplinary, you know,
mhm,
and talking to people who are studying similar things from a different angle.
mhm.
So,
And what about a class where it's team taught?
oh,
And
wouldn't
we
that be fun?
and we just go back and forth
Oh,
about
sign me up. If we could do
yeah,
that, I would love it. That would be
I
yeah,
fun.
think from the student side, we would definitely like that a lot,
yeah.
getting different. I think because there's a lot of overlap in interests. A lot of sociology students love psychology, a lot of psychology science students
Oh
like.
yeah, a lot of them minor back and forth. I don't know, would the honors college or HCAP do it? We could think about it.
Mhm. I think that it would be
I bet
definitely a good
I bet you if the
suggestion.
units are interested, I bet they would be.
Yeah,
No.
excellent.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank y'all very much.
You too, and good luck. And
Yeah.
I'll send you the students' contact stuff later today.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank y'all. Goodbye.
Happy
Thank
holidays.
you. Good to meet you.